you here at Scientists Warning Europe's event looking into climate leadership. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Victoria Hirth. Dr. Victoria Hirth is an expert on governance, has particularly been working on with a focus on transformation towards sustainability, and is a fellow of the Cambridge Institute of System Leadership. We will be joined very soon by Lorenzo Fioramentini. Lorenzo is a professor of economics. He is a co-author of the Scientists Warnings into Action paper that was issued at COP26, and he is also a member of the Italian Parliament. We are very, very happy to have him here, and we'll be looking forward to going into a little bit into what was said in the Scientists Warnings into Action paper that was issued at COP26. We'd like to let you all know that this is still open for signing. So any graduate scientist, please come to our website and sign that paper. We're going to keep it open for signing all the way through to COP27. So please do come and sign it, or post on your social media, let people know that they can sign it. Now, at COP26, Scientists Warning Europe was very much focused on trying to get the right kind of leadership that we need for our planet and for the climate. We then, at the beginning of COP26, we were still working on a film that we were bringing out, and that was a 3-minute film created by the director of the last David Attenborough film on Netflix, Jonathan Clay. And that film was specifically talking about the Scientists' Warnings into Action paper, the theme behind it, and where we were going. And we'd just like to start today by showing you that 3-minute film before we get started with talking to the panelists.
I wish I knew before.
I wish I knew much earlier on.
I wish.
If I had known.
When I came into it, I was just like, yeah, we're going to change all this. We're going to stop offshore drilling. We're going to make sure that this environmental agency stops allowing chemical facilities to pollute in lower income Black and Latino neighborhoods. And then realizing like, oh, people have been actually working on that for decades. I'm just new to the game.
Had been longing for seeing scientists get their hands dirty, get into the crux of the matter, get into the eye of the storm.
We are not yet able as a scientific community to help grab our fellow earthlings by the scruff of the neck and say, come, we are heading into big changes.
I wonder a lot about whether being a scientist is the best thing to do in the times of these urgent environmental crises.
It's only immediate, rapid and far-reaching action that's going to keep 1.5 degrees within reach.
For how much longer can you shout louder in more dramatic font? We need to rethink the fundamental assumptions of what we're doing.
These times are going to call on us to be the best people that we can be.
We have to translate our outrage, our fears, our anxieties, our grief about what's happening into action.
I myself have realized how hard it is, even for one person that gets into government and wants to pursue a transformative agenda, to do so alone.
It's really, really important, I think, that we support each other to take political action.
If you want to take climate action, you can. You don't have to be perfect. The world isn't on my shoulders. It's not on your shoulders. It's all of us together.
We understand enough. We understand plenty. All of our problems are fundamentally political. They're fundamentally about people. They're about our institutions. They're about our governance.
It's time to stand together to face down corruption and vested interests.
We need to let go of things we've gotten so accustomed to, so familiar, so dependent on for a long time, including not just habits and behaviors, but ways of thinking.
Visionary leadership doesn't come out of the sky. It needs to be team play at its best.
Changing the time horizons upon which we make decisions is really a big and important part of this. Yes, scientists are critical to this equation, but so is everybody else.
it's like a two-way process. I have to listen to lots of people because there are lots of things I don't know.
I used to think that things will just happen maybe by magic, but you make the change happen by walking the talk.
For many years, I felt that I was just saying, the world doesn't have to be this way, we can change it. Only in the last 5 years, I've felt that we can say, we are changing it.
Together we can and must succeed.
You are the people who make the difference now.
Be courageous.
To do whatever we can.
The choice is in our hands.
Great, thank you very much for playing that, Will. So that's what we did at COP26. That was the film we launched in association with the Scientists Warnings into Action paper. I can see that Lorenzo has managed to join us now. Hi, Lorenzo. I did just a very brief introduction for you already. We'll come over to you more in a minute. The Scientists Warnings into Action paper that was issued at COP26, authored by around 15 scientists and experts, is the fourth in a line of 4 great scientist warnings: 1992, 2017, 2019, and now 2021, all of which have been signed by thousands of other scientists supporting what the core authors have said. Now, within the main scientist warnings in the last 6 years, the number of areas that were focused on was 6. So that was energy, economy, food, nature, pollutants, and population. A 7th area was introduced into the next paper, which was leadership. So under all of the previous 6 headings, the paper would look at different areas of leadership that could be recommended, some at an international level, some at a national or subnational level, or even at individual or community level. So we'll be talking around some of those topics today. So I think now with both Lorenzo and Victoria now online, we'll go to the panel discussion. We'll start. So Lorenzo, having already introduced him, but I will reintroduce him now. And in fact, I've been warned by one of my colleagues I should introduce myself. So Ed Gemmell, Managing Director of Scientists Warning Europe. I should have introduced myself at the beginning. And then if I come to Lorenzo, so Lorenzo Fioramonti, who's a member of the Italian Parliament. And Lorenzo is also a professor of economics and a co-author of the Scientists Warnings into Action paper. And Lorenzo, if you might be able to just spend 30 seconds or more introducing yourself, and then maybe let's come on, and then we'll come to Victoria afterwards for the same comments. When we think about climate leadership, when you yourselves thinking about it, what are those sort of big thoughts you have? What are those big takeaways that you would have to share with everybody?
Well, thanks everyone, and hi Ed, and it's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. So well done on organizing it. As Ed said, I'm a sitting member of Parliament. I was the Minister of Education, University and Research in Italy between 2018 and 2019. And we did something, we did a lot of things, but we did something I'm really proud of, which is to make the teaching and learning of sustainability mandatory in all schools in Italy across the board. And I think that is critical in building the kind of leadership that we need, because leadership is also a byproduct of desires, expectations, of a cultural shift. And I don't see this happening at the pace that we need. So I think both in terms of the demand side as well as the supply side of leadership, I don't think we're doing badly compared to a few years back, but I think we're not doing it fast enough and effectively enough. And the thing is that we have wasted at least 30 years of time to do something. So now we don't have the luxury of simply enjoying marginal improvements, right? So that's my 30 seconds.
Great, thank you very much. Victoria, if you'd like to come with a bit of an intro and maybe follow on from where Lorenzo was.
Yeah, sure. Again, same as Lorenzo. Great to be here. Great to see such fantastic people joining us in this conversation, which we hope will be a conversation, and looking forward to all your interesting questions. Yeah, as Ed said, I mean, I'm a sort of an interdisciplinary, sitting between theory and practice person who for the last 20 years have been trying to work out where the hell have we come from, where are we at, and where are we heading to, which I would say are also the sort of foundations of leadership, because if you're going to lead, you really need to know those three things, otherwise you'll be a fantastic leader leading in a really bad direction, which I'll come on to in a minute. I focus mostly around purpose, governance, marketing, leadership, and culture, because I think within any organizing system, those are really, really core pillars. And if you can get those right, then you're probably going to be working in the right direction. And, you know, I've worked on standards building as a way of creating change. I've worked as a full-time academic on a way of creating change. I'm on the board of the Soil Association, and so a sort of, you know, a bit like everyone, just sort of trying to find the best way that I can have the impact that I can. So I'll maybe stop there before delving in. I don't know if Lorenzo, you wanted to start. I don't know how you want to do it, Ed, but getting into the sort of meat of it, I suppose. Sorry, I'm a vegetarian as well, so maybe not the meat of it. What was it?
No,
the soya of it.
Sure, that's great, Victoria. And I think as a start, and then bringing in Lorenzo now on this, talking about bringing your best skills into the action, bringing your best skills to the forefront. Does that mean that we all have to have leadership skills, or does that mean leading by example? I'd like to have a suggestion of what you might think on that from both of you. And Lorenzo, if you could already as well, give us a bit of an overview then of climate leadership in Italy, or maybe from even a European perspective. There's quite a few of these people I can see are based either in the UK or in the US, so that might be nice.
Well, Ed, I think, first of all, as I said, we're not doing the things that are needed fast enough. But in some cases, our leadership is abysmal, and it's a bit like what Victoria was saying. You know, like some of our leaders are leading us in the wrong direction, and I think, you know, we can't ignore the fact that the war in Ukraine has shifted the debate entirely. I mean, it seems that overnight, a lot of governments have simply forgotten that we are all together in this in fighting against climate change, and that is an existential threat. And so it's really hard to find leadership that somehow makes us believe, especially in governments, that makes us believe that we do stand a chance of doing the right things. But there are many different types of leadership, and I think we all need to be leaders one way or another. But leaders don't have to appear. Leaders can lead from behind. Leaders can lead by example. Leaders nowadays are mostly facilitators, people that connect the dots. I think we shouldn't confuse leadership with appearance, with being at the front. I mean, Nelson Mandela used to say that the best leader is the one that leads from behind, for instance, right? So I think, and then you find a lot of leaders. You find leaders in the civil society movements, you find leaders in academia, you find leaders of practice around many different countries and cities, and that gives me a lot of hope. However, the main problem here is scale. And again, if we were in the 1970s, I think we'd be very happy to see this bubbling up at the bottom, at the grassroots, like this emerging of new practices. But it's late. So we do need all sorts of leadership at the same time. So we need the leadership that is happening across civil society. We need the youth leadership. We need the leadership that is coming from the older generations as well. But we do also need to exert pressure so as to have the right leaders in government, in leading corporations, and so on and so forth. That is one of the reasons why I decided to leave my cushy position in academia and get into this extremely feisty and unpredictable terrain, which is politics. But I think it is indispensable. And if there are academics out there, I think we all need to do that. And that, I think, is also the message of our warning, that scientists cannot just limit themselves to writing papers and telling the truth. They have to, act on the truth. And so similarly to what has been done during the Cold War, when scientists got together to fight against the risk of nuclear confrontation and, and the different treaties that emerged out of that, I think we now need scientists to say openly that this is something that is clearly requiring their action as well.
I think just, Victoria, if you could sort of follow up from that and thinking of this idea of scientists coming into the fray, and I think we'll return to it as well today, very much in the Scientists Warning Europe video related to the paper that we just showed, the scientists were pretty much saying, we can't shout any louder in bolder font. You know, we've been doing it for so long. So what are your thoughts on scientists coming into the fray and getting their message across and actually leading us to, you know, to the place we need to be, not just telling us the statistics?
Yeah, definitely. And then maybe I could root back to some foundational points that I'd like to sort of set out, I suppose, my views on this. But on that particular point, Ed, I would say, yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, all leadership, you're right, changing anything in the world, you either push it, you either physically move it, or you communicate it. And that's it, really. They're the only powers we ultimately have, you know, and we communicate through various means. If you're leading, it's because you are trying to articulate that there is a place that is unknown that needs to be moved into. Now, that's a scary thing because no one likes moving into the unknown. But we do it every single day, but we pretend it's not as unknown as it is. So if scientists are saying to everyone else, go and move into the unknown, but they're not doing it themselves, they're not embodying that, then it becomes a very hollow message. Because whilst we've been able to try and strip humanity from pretty much all our disciplines and all our processes and all our organizations, ultimately we are humans. And that means we do not believe a message if people don't embody the consequences of that message. It becomes futile. So I think, but this comes down to the fundamental point that I was wanting to make, is that we've got to be really clear what we're leading for. I mean, if you're in academia, or just say you're in academia, why are you in academia? What is it that you are trying to achieve? And I think ultimately, the leadership is within all of us. And leadership is process, it's context, and leadership ultimately is purpose, which is one of the key points that I'd like to make today. And you've got to be really clear what it is. When you put energy to something, why are you putting that energy in that place and not somewhere else? And I think if we start all to ask ourselves those questions, and embody what it is we really want to bring about in the world, then we will all be acting as leaders. So one of my fundamental points is really that I think we have diffused and dispersed this common meta purpose of humanity. We, even when the Brundtland Report was produced, which essentially summarized what our overarching human purpose is, in other words, well-being for everyone in the longer term. And we might add planet into that. So long-term well-being of all people and planet. I mean, that's the closest we're going to get to a human meta-purpose. If that is the case, and if anyone ultimately believes that, and I think if you ask enough whys, you pretty much get there, unless you have different views about equality or something else. And so if we can start to clarify, and I think that's where we're getting, and I know, Lorenzo, you've done some fantastic work on this, it's been core to my work for a long period of time, is that I think we are starting to sing with one voice around the ultimate thing we are leading to. And once we get that nailed, then we can start uniting the energy. There is so much fluff and noise and difficult. And I think that's one of the things that's so frustrating is, but we're not all united in our energy. And so leadership is about uniting, helping to provide the conditions to unite energy towards something of use. And that's something of use, if we can keep in mind that that's long-term well-being for all people and planet, and then ask ourselves, what is our strategic contribution to that? And how can we enable others to live their strategic contribution? I think if we can simplify it in that way, we will unleash that leadership, because it is everywhere. It's just diffused energy at the moment, I would say.
So, I mean, that's definitely the way we get it going, how we find it and encourage leadership to get going. I do want to bring you both back to scientists just for a little bit longer, because we are Scientists Warning Europe. The film has told us about what the scientists have been doing. The first warning came out in 1992. So scientists have really been shouting from the rooftops about this. They've been doing their reports. They've been teaching in their universities. Now, Lorenzo, you've gone into politics. So you've gone and decided you'll stick your head above the parapet where you can get it shot off in order to drive the action forward. Can we maybe bring out what we think practical terms scientists should be doing, and also maybe a couple of examples of scientists, not yourselves in this instance, but examples of scientists you might know that are doing things, or examples of what they are doing at the moment?
Well, as Victoria said, I think that there are different forms of leadership, and you need to find a way that is most suitable to you. And I think ultimately what matters is that we all speak with one, we first of all identify the most significant pressure points, right? We don't want to waste energy. We want to, hit where it has the biggest impact, potential impact, and science can help us in that regard, identifying those areas. And the other thing is, connecting the dots, connecting the different actions so that they are perceived as a movement, they're perceived as one single flow of energy that goes in the right direction. I think too often we do the opposite, right? And we think that leadership means dividing and appearing ourselves rather than being united. And I think we need, narcissism and leadership as two different things. And we have no space for narcissism. And incidentally, unfortunately, the environmental movement across the world over the past 40 years has been driven down and apart by the narcissistic attitude of environmental leaders who are more concerned about themselves, selling their books and selling their image than achieving any impact. And you can quote me on that. Now, what scientists can do, they have to remember that they are influential people in society, right? We are influential when we get interviewed. We're influential when we teach. And we need to start teaching these things. We need to start making our teaching relevant. And I think one of them, just like what we did with schools applies to universities. Are the universities relevant? Are we just wasting our time? Are degrees relevant? Are we training the economists of the future, the engineers of the future? Because if we're not, I invite everyone to stop teaching. Do not teach the past. You get paid a salary to teach the future. Come and demand that change in your university. Often we underestimate. I see someone here rightly saying, okay, we need to influence politicians. Of course we need to do that. But do not forget that there are hundreds of thousands and millions of students coming to our universities and often getting the wrong message from us just because we stick to the textbook. When I decided to make sustainability mandatory in all schools, it was because I saw the research that we did, and we knew that if we could get 8.5 million kids in Italy, 8.5 million kids becoming ambassadors of change, nagging their parents, going back to their churches, to their associations, being, like active change makers in that regard, that's a massive constituency. That's an army. That's powerful. It's powerful today, not just when they grow up and become adults. It's already powerful right away. So there are, some of us will have perhaps, a better inclination to do something which is more adventurous, like running for election or putting together a party. I congratulate any scientist that has the guts to put together a new party and confront the political arena. But maybe others will just be extremely successful teachers and lecturers and repurpose their universities. I mean, there is a very beautiful special issue that Victoria and I contributed to about that, how you repurpose the role of universities in the climate change era. And who are these people? Oh, there are many. I mean, I think some of the people are the people that took the lead in writing this paper. Some of the people are, our friends from the Stockholm Resilience Center. Jim Hansen, we all know, right? But my very good friend, Robert Costanza at UCL now, previously at ANU. Herman Daly, Tim Jackson. There are many scholars, and I'm not doing justice to the variety of these people, and many of them are very, very vocal. But I think we do have a lot that we can do, and especially in using the tools that are already at our disposal to enact that kind of change. And as I said, do not underestimate the power we have as teachers.
I mean, I think, Victoria, coming on to you, but I think if I could just interject a bit of experience from my side on youth and leadership. And we saw a lot at COP26. There were a lot of powerful, youthful speakers there talking about that they were excluded often from the decision-making in relation to climate and in moving forward action. And in a very UK scale, and I am a very small politician in comparison to Lorenzo, but I'm a unitary councillor in the UK. But our parish councils in the UK, or at least in England and Wales, we have 10,000 of them. 3,000 of them don't have enough councillors. So on all of those councils, 18-year-olds could step in today to join those councils, be co-opted next month, and already start to take action. I mean, it applies to everybody here. So everybody who wants to take action on climate, you could be joining a parish council tomorrow in your area, enacting a climate emergency, declaring a 2030 target and getting on with the work. But it's particularly open to young people. And most of these parish councils are desperate to get them in to come and work with them. So that's just a bit of a shout out for any youth here, or anybody who knows anybody youthful to try and press them in that direction. Victoria, then coming on to youth, and there's already been a question on it actually in the chat. Instructing the youth, teaching them, inspiring, absolutely fantastic. Of course, even if they join a parish council, they can have a small effect, but they're not really in control of what's going on. As Lorenzo said, we don't have very much time. So should we be concentrating on the youth and bringing them in and forward in terms of leadership, or should we be concentrating on the 50, 60, 70-year-olds who are in positions of power, be it in finance, business, politics, or whatever?
It's like all of these things. It can never be an either or, it's got to be an and. You know, we need everything. We need everything at absolutely all levels, and it all has a role to play. And, you know, there are a few things that are worth keeping in mind. You know, you only need to change 3% of people to start to create a critical mass that can create more change. So, you know, thinking carefully about not just is it youth or older people, but who, you know, using the best of what we understand about opinion leaders, about how ideas spread, et cetera, et cetera. I think that we also need to be, again, it's this question of unity. We need to be talking much more about what we need to do together than, you know, and I'm a marketer, you know, one of my hats is. So segmenting and targeting are really, really critical, but we have to make sure that in doing that and being strategic, we're not actually, you know, losing the wood for the trees, that we understand that this has got to be about building a narrative of unity. And just as much as I see the youth coming along and challenging things, I see that shift happening everywhere. And sometimes we talk about the youth, oh my God, it frustrated me so much, you know, since the early days. No offense to anyone who thinks like this still, is that, oh, we've got to focus on children. And I think it's fantastic what you did, Lorenzo, in terms of education. And it's absolutely a critical part of the agenda. And what we're seeing now in terms of momentum has come from stuff like that. But the idea that we just need to pass it on to the next gen, oh, the children, they need to sort out, oh, we need to educate the children. No, we all need to go through a profound change. And one thing I'd like to just emphasize here as well, in terms of practicality, in terms of leadership, in terms of both answering your question about scientists and academics, but just in general. One of the ways in which we can simplify our understanding of change is thinking about culture. And in a synthesis that I did, and there's a paper going to come out as part of the Unleashing Sustainable Business series that I've been writing with CISL, is on unleashing culture. And we can think of culture really simply in terms of, it is firstly about worldviews. That is about what we think is fundamentally most valuable to protect and enhance, how we think the world works, and therefore what we think we should do to protect and enhance that which is valuable. Now, often that's unconscious, but those are our worldviews, our foundational assumptions. When those worldviews hit context, over time, they create what we might think of as hardware and software. So cultural hardware and cultural software, a set of intangible things that sort of express those worldviews in context, and a set of systems, processes, and structures that set that in context. And essentially, that is the glue. When they say that you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, it's because it literally is the glue. The foundation being the basis of purpose, our values and what we're trying to achieve in the world, and then how we structure our understanding of how to bring that about. And like I say, often it's implicit. So if we want to think about leading, we're talking about altering everything about that culture. And sometimes we start thinking, see, and Donella Meadows had loads of great important things to say about this. We need to start really thinking very critically about those worldviews, about excavating them, about bringing them up into what you might call discursive elaboration, as in a discussion where we can talk about them, where we can say, what are our worldviews, you know? And in the British Standard in Purpose-Driven Organizations, which is coming out in June, which I was the technical author for, it is called Purpose-Driven Organizations, Worldviews, Principles and Behaviors. So it's not just a principle-based standard, it starts by exposing the worldviews. So that's the first way to think about it, and then start thinking about the mechanics in terms of, you know, a culture. And like you said, Lorenzo, when you're standing up as an academic in front of an audience of any sort, you're essentially acculturizing that audience. You are reaffirming a set of worldviews, you are reaffirming a set of hardware and software. And of course, we are, as academics, you are part of that cultural system. So you are reproducing and replicating it. So to be an academic is to have the luxury, to have the space, in theory, to have a level of reflexivity that most others can't. So I think one of the hopes, apart from anything else, is if academics cannot do this, it's very hard for others to look and see, well, if they have the luxury to have this meta reflection that we don't even have time to you know, how is it that we can, you know, can change? So I think, so I'll stop there, but just to say, I think we can all get clued up much, much better about what culture is, about how it's reproduced, and our role at whatever level that is, about either reproducing a culture that's not working or one that is working. And that starts with saying what is fundamentally valuable and what are our fundamental assumptions about the world. Oh, you're on mute, Ed.
Thank you. Following on from that, aren't we really saying it's about communication? So what we're talking about is we've got the culture, we've done our reflection, we've even got the strategy, but we've then got to get out and communicate it to everybody. Lorenzo, you mentioned that, you know, you respect the scientists that get out and start a new political party. Isn't that all a form of communication? So aren't we talking about upping the game on climate communication in order to get the message across to everybody? Is that what we're really saying here? So Lorenzo, maybe you could tackle that first.
Probably. I'm not sure it's the only thing, but communication is so important these days. Communication is the basis of a lot of things, right? I mean, when I moved from academia to my temporary political role, I realized how we underestimate the issue of scale. For instance, when you get into politics, you realize that you really start having an impact on what Victoria was saying when you reach numbers that are often very seldom reached by our academic work individually. So communication has to be upgraded. We need to learn. This is not easy for scientists. We need to learn how to beat our opponents at their game, right? And so we're used to having, you know, 25 slides and very boring messages and having an audience that it is true that we are culturalizing, you know, what do you say, culturalizing actors, but it's also true that our audience at the university is often captive, right? They can't leave, you know, and they listen to us even if we bore them to death. Now, when you get out there, you need to make sure that you are entertaining, you're captivating. You need to be able to familiarize yourself, and not because I like it, okay? This is not a valid judgment. I'm not saying that the way the world communicates is the right way, but that's the world we have. That's the world we have now, and we can't simply shy away from it. So learning how to be fun, learning how to be captivating, learning how to be, how to get the message across with the different tools that are available. I mean, there is this beautiful, just to give you an example, there's this beautiful documentary now running on Netflix. You probably have seen it with David Attenborough and Göran Rockström. And so, okay, well, there is a bit of an inundation and an inflation of documentaries these days, and probably they don't have the same impact. But I think much more of this has to happen, much more of this. And getting out of our comfort zones. Again, I think we're powerful people as scientists, but I think we'd be massively more powerful if we were willing to get out of our comfort zones, including the fact that, you know, at some point we may look ridiculous. You know, at some point we may be taken, we may be hit hard, right? By one thing that I realized is that as soon as I stepped into politics, the media turned against me. I mean, like, seriously, you know, lawsuits and because I had a COP in Madrid where you were, some of us were together. I was a minister in 2019. And because of my declarations at COP in Madrid, I got a lawsuit from fossil fuel companies because they argued that I couldn't say what I said, which simply said the truth, right? That the fossil fuel industry is sitting on a lot of stranded assets unless they move out of oil, because if we are to respect our climate commitments and Paris above all, we're going to have to run out of that. And what is now an asset is going to become a liability within a few years. So it's a good financial approach to get rid of it before it becomes a stranded asset. For that reason, I was actually taken to court because they argued that I was making those declarations when the markets were still open, and apparently there was a bit of a crash in some of these stocks. But I didn't give up, right? I kept doing it anyway. But what I'm saying is that we need to have like a thick skin and realize that it's harder. Maybe we also need to eradicate ourselves in terms of the skills that are required. But again, we don't have the luxury of simply saying, hey, I'm just a scientist. Oh, you know what? I got a PhD, but I was never trained as a theater guy. I don't look good on TV. Well, you know what? Learn how to do it, because we need that. So, so this is, I think, so communication is crucial, but again, to make that work, you need a lot of different things, a lot of collaboration, for instance. And I think that is not happening as I'd like to see it, because there's also a lot of narcissism among scientists. And that is, defying the purpose, so anyway, I hope I made myself understood. Sorry, guys. I'm really tired today.
They're great comments. If I could pick up on a couple of them, actually. And and this is not remotely connecting narcissism with David Attenborough, because I think he's anything but a narcissist. And I think he does fabulous communication on the climate science. But I've always had the impression, I don't know if other people have, when I hear something by David Attenborough, I sort of get the climate science, but I don't feel a sense of urgency, even when he tells me it's urgent, because I get that feeling that David's cuddling me and he's going to do it. He's going to look after me and it'll all be okay. When
Such
David's
a wonderful
talking.
person. We all like him.
He's an absolutely lovely guy and brilliant. But I always get that feeling of not of urgency. So it's absolutely urgent, he tells me, but he's going to deal with it. I get that sort of feeling. And just before I throw it over to Victoria, the having read the book by Dale Vince, so the owner of Ecotricity, who's often very outspoken on TV here on various issues. And Dale says that where climate activists or climate leaders have missed the trick is in populism. And he's not suggesting that climate leaders should be lying or anything like that at all. He said, but there's a lot of doom and gloom, a lot of statistics, and we're not coming out with the truthful equivalent of 250 million a week on the side of the bus or whatever it would be, and that's required for climate leaders to up their game. So before we start going out to going through more questions straight from the chat, this will be the last sort of general bit. Victoria, maybe you could sort of comment on the communications aspect, particularly maybe on the thing that Lorenzo was bringing in, that we need to be better in the climate circle in the way we communicate, and maybe be more populist like Dale Vince suggests.
Okay, yeah, I'll start by just going back to that key proposition, which is, it sounds controversial, but and I'd love anyone to come back with where I've got this wrong. So I'm testing this, but I really don't think that other than physically pushing things, the only other thing we do is communicate. Everything everything else is that. Otherwise, we're just in a void, as if we don't exist. So the only way we can change, lead, do anything other than physically move things, and you need communication to persuade other people to physically move things. So, there's that going on as well. So it's absolutely core. And we've got to remember communication is not just verbal communication. It comes in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of forms. So yes, we do need to get really good at it. I would say, well, firstly, there's a paper that myself, Ian Stewart, and I, who did the special issue on repurposing universities, also wrote a paper called Selling Planet Earth in Geoscience Communications. And scientists are marketers, and they've got to work out what kind of marketing they're doing, because if they're basically just flogging stuff, make and sell, which is the business as usual paradigm, make stuff and try and flog it, then we've got a problem. And I'd say we've got a problem, because I think a lot of science and in general is about making stuff and flogging it. Or it moves to, well, let's see what people want and then let's give it to them. Or we move to a purpose-driven approach, which says what's in the best interest of long-term well-being for all people and planet, and then how do we bring ourselves together? So I think there's something about the fundamentals, again, coming right back down to worldviews and culture. What are we fundamentally trying to communicate here? And then I would say on that sort of point, and I agree with everything Lorenzo said, and I would say it comes back down to what kind of leader in what kind of context. For me, the fundamentals we need to think about here is that leadership is about, sometimes it's about putting yourself out there to be that great leader, that great person theory. Occasionally we need that, especially when we're wanting to corral people quickly to a certain direction. And in that case, yes, you need those kinds of skills that Lorenzo is talking about. But actually, what we're starting to understand is that meta purpose, that purpose is the leader, and that real leaders put themselves or will, even if they have to momentarily step into the light, will be constantly trying to orchestrate so that the culture is one that is delivering that value of long-term well-being for all, so that they are stepping back from the limelight and they are enabling the system to work. So encoding leadership in your worldviews, in your hardware and your software. And everyone has a role to play at all different levels, and fine-tuning your communication. Some of the greatest climate leaders, it's all relative to your capacity. If you go down the pub and the conversation's been about football and you start talking about climate change in a way that's nuanced, that's subtle, that fits with the moment, that is an art of communication. And you can hone that skill if that's the power that you have in the system. So I would say, yes, Lorenzo, and we absolutely need people like you with that kind of communication skill, and then we need everything else in between. And just finally, I would say I agree also with Lorenzo about being scared. I think it wasn't Christiana Figueres. It was I've forgotten her name, leader of the IMF, and she said, I told myself that I would not be leading properly if I wasn't doing something genuinely scary every single day. And I think that's an absolute fundamental truth. Leadership is about, like say, asking the system to step into the unknown. And you therefore have to embody that. And if you're staying safe, you're not pushing at that leadership boundary. That would be true even in normal times. In the times we're in now, we need to be, so essentially this idea, one more thing before I shut up, Ed, is like feasible. We talk about what's feasible. Leadership is creating the new feasible. So we need to be pragmatic. But if we turn around all the time and say, yeah, but it's not really feasible, well, then of course it isn't. Nothing's feasible until we create the new feasible. That is scary because we don't know what it is. And it's scary to have the power to bring others with you on a journey to somewhere else. So that's double scariness. But if we're not practicing being scared, then we're not leading, I would say.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I could listen to you describing these things all day, Victoria. I mean, and there's no question, as Lorenzo put it before, you've got to step out of your comfort zone and actually get going for it. And that's when you've got the right focus, of course. So let's come down to some nuts and bolts and maybe some slightly more quick fire answers to some of these questions. And then I'm going to try and pull in more and more from the chat as we go. Now, a few people have mentioned some international aspects in the chat. So the question is, we've had 26 attempts at a proper international agreement that's actually going to save the planet. Am I myself going mad, or is that process broken and it's not going to get us the proper leadership that we need? What's your view, both of you? Victoria, you're on screen. Go. You go first.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for the prompt. It's easy to have long answers. I would say it's a part of the process. It's one of those things that we need. It's useful for many things, maybe not the thing we want it to be useful for. It's not going to change the world. It's not going to do the David Attenborough thing and sort us all out, but it is going to give us a moment to pause and think. It is going to draw media attention at a moment in time. It is going to pose difficult questions. So maybe we're expecting too much of it. So I think it's broken for what we over expected of it, but then that isn't really that it's broken. It just, I think we had the wrong expectations.
Okay, Lorenzo, COPs.
I think it is, I agree with Victoria. I also get very disappointed, but without these institutions, how do you get where you want to get, right? The world is complex. The world is extremely, there was a very good friend of mine once told me, participation is a real pain in the neck, but it's the only way. And in a sense, these governance structures are very similar. They're frustrating, but they're also frustrating because they're trying to get 9 billion people to do something, or so we should be, I like the call on populism in terms of communication and so on and so forth, but complexity is part of the game as well. So we need to be able to embrace both, and I think we need to play within these arenas, because otherwise it's really hard to get anything really going besides declarations, and or perhaps build more efficient arenas, but they will need to be equivalently complex and multilateral.
Great, thank you. Let me just add a bit in on there. I mean, my feeling on the COPs, apart from like everybody I think who wants to do anything, you come out of them absolutely deflated and destroyed for a week or two afterwards. But in actual fact, there's always some progress forward, but it's never enough. So I feel that every time there's a COP, we actually slip further back by not getting enough progress. Having said that, there's always some positives. And each of those positives, those little steps forward, I think prepare the world for when the dam breaks, when everyone really gets it and the leaders really drive it forward, and we're a little bit more prepared for it with every COP that's moved forward. Moving on that same sort of topic then, putting it to you then, if we're not going to get the big international leadership that we expect out of COPs, or potentially anywhere internationally, is it then down to national governments to do the big heavy lifting? And I'd like to put that in context before I get your comments on it. So in the UK, we hear a lot of press about how we are world leading in our climate targets. Okay, we've got a 2050 net zero target, we've got a number of NDCs, and we talk about being world leading. But is the UK world leading in a pack of a G20 who are simply not going fast enough? So actually being world leading in this context is world failing. And in actual fact, do we actually need nations to move much faster, to be at the front with much more ambitious goals? And I'm thinking 2030, to be there and inspire others. What do you think?
I think we need to move out of relative to absolute, and we need to do really, really, really quickly. I think it's one of our biggest failings, and it's part of this culture that we talked about, that we take our lead from a hyper-real societal reality that we've created over the decades, and that abstraction from the reality is one of the reasons we're in this place. We need to get very clear about what we absolutely have to do and judge ourselves and hold ourselves and others to account in that. Don't want to see benchmarking, don't want to see relative, don't want to say we're leading the pack. I think it's a load of nonsense if we are not working to, at an absolute minimum, a fair contribution to the health of the social and environmental systems on which our long-term well-being depends. Forget about it. If we're not working towards understanding and meeting that, then
totally with you. Absolutely. I'm glad you said it much better than I could. Lorenzo.
I'm completely in agreement with Victoria. I think partly winning is losing. Okay, so we need to understand this, right? So there's no half victory here. So we shouldn't sit back and relax and think, oh, well, we're at least better than our neighbors, and I have many issues with how the British government is dealing with this. And I think we desperately need better practices. And I think some countries, even smaller countries, can really be powerful at showing. I think one of the main issues we're dealing with is that a lot of people around the world at different levels, including in the media, by the way, we haven't spoken about the media, but the media is a huge problem because journalists are incompetent, grossly incompetent. In some cases, they're even paid by those who are defending certain interests. But that's a minority. I think the majority of journalists are simply incompetent, don't have time, they're sloppy, and so they regurgitate old ideas because that's easy to do, right? It's much more complicated to engage with new ideas. And but if countries, regions, and cities show a different way, what happens is that instead of having an hour and a half conversation with me and Victoria and trying to make sense of our words, you just show the picture and say, this was done, man. It's here. Look, do you think the people in New Zealand, for instance, are suffering from having done better than others? Do you think that the citizens of Costa Rica are suffering from having done better than others? So these countries, this is just an example. We could identify other countries, but the more you show real practices, the more people get convinced that the transition to a climate-friendly society is not a freaking sacrifice. It's actually a desirable transition, and people should aspire to do that, even if the climate problem was fixed. That's my argument. And this is what Victoria was saying when she said the purpose must be the well-being of everyone. And I don't think you need to add planet, because there's no well-being without planet. There's no well-being with thriving ecosystems. But we should do this even if we fix the climate with any other technological innovation. We should do it anyway, because it's about living better. It's about having a more fulfilling life. And when you show the practice, then people react and say, hey, dude, but if they do it there, why don't we do it too, right? We've got nothing to lose out of it.
And you're absolutely right. The communication has to be, as Victoria's always saying, is about well-being. Because if we only focus on survival, like certain activist organizations do, and that sort of thing, that doesn't get everybody out of bed in the morning. We're getting out of bed just to manage to survive. The way I try to put it in terms of getting international action on these things is we're running a race, and halfway around the race, the leading pack of runners is off the pace. They're not going to achieve whatever world record they were trying to do. And what we need is one of these runners to break from the front, show a determined effort to get there in world record time. And then what happens after that? Hey ho, everybody starts following in different groups, and the whole thing is accelerated and moved forward. So moving down one scale, we aren't seeming to get what we need at a national scale, but particularly, certainly in the UK, and I'm sure it's in other places, we are getting regional action coming. And in a minute, I'm going to bring in a good friend of mine who's got his hand up patiently for the last 10 minutes. Who does some of this work as well, and that's that we have, Glasgow, London, Manchester, many cities around the world that are taking aggressive and adequate, I'd actually call them adequate climate targets, determining that they're going to get to carbon zero by 2030, and they're out leading where the national governments are not. So do you think the real effective leadership currently is happening at that lower level, at that regional and city level? Do you think that's enough? Or have we just got to up the game? Who would like to say that? Lorenzo, you're on. Why don't you go first?
Okay, I think what we see happening at the local level is certainly better leadership, more creative leadership, also a kind of leadership that people can sense. But again, unfortunately, we need to connect the dots across all different levels. We're not going to make a difference unless we do that. But every time a mayor comes up with a new idea, every time there is a local council that does something extraordinarily innovative, you're adding evidence that the kind of transition we're talking about is desirable, it's doable, it's viable, and it actually has positive effects on all different levels. So it is all welcome. And certainly, I think what we see happening at the local level is certainly more exciting than what we see happening at the global and national levels.
Right, brilliant. Victoria, if you'd like to make a quick comment on that, then I'm going to go to somebody who's actually doing some of it at a local level, Paul Haslam. So you can make a quick comment in a minute, Paul. So go ahead, Victoria.
I think the reality is that you can see fantastic practice at all levels, and some of it is hidden, and that's a shame when it's hidden. But maybe maybe that's okay, because, again, it's about making purpose that leader, actually. So I think I see corporates at all levels, at all types, doing amazing things, and amazing, things, again, is in the context of the sphere that you have. So I think that if we can get, and this is why I also talk about in terms of leadership, one of the things we could focus our leadership on is the governance of governance, right? Because we're not going to bet on the right horses. We're not going to get that right. We'll drown in bureaucracy if we try to. So I think, at those layers of governance, national governance and the governance of all of the organizational systems, if we can get that right, I think that is true leadership. I want to make a tiny point to Lorenzo's one about planet. That's about the intrinsic value of nature as an ultimate end, not as a means to an end. So 99% of conversations about the environment are about the instrumental value of environment to humans. Let's be clear if that's what we mean, but we need to give space to those people with the ethic that nature has an intrinsic right to as an end in itself, along with humans. And then, of course, they're interconnected.
Great, thanks, Victoria. Now I'm going to call in Paul just for 30 seconds, Paul, when I bring you in. And just as a quick intro, Paul actually, like myself, is a councillor at several levels and is taking or trying to drive a lot of climate action in his area. Go ahead, Paul, 30 seconds. If you'd like to ask a question, go ahead.
Yeah. Your two guests are very good and very intellectual, and we are intellectualizing something that is, for me, much more fundamental. I would like to recommend a book called Our Iceberg is Melting by John Cotter. It's all about change. But the big point here is that there's insufficient sense of urgency. Everybody is too comfortable. So there's not a reason why to change. It's too comfortable. Nobody's making it uncomfortable. Nobody's putting a tax on these things. So the critical issue is we have to create a crisis. And if we talk about communication, we should have on our screens every night about the floods or the fires in Australia. I mean, that was a great piece of stuff to be through. But 60% of all our fight against climate change is going to be behavioral change, and we really have to influence that. But we're not creating, as I say, a sense of discomfort. These are all words that your guests have used, but people are not uncomfortable enough to move, and that's what we have to do. People are actually either away from or towards. Now, the scientists that we've got on the program today are towards, but we have other people that really should that are away from, and we need to activate that away from approach. I could go on, but I shan't. I just feel that we're intellectualizing this too much, and we really have to scare people, not just scare ourselves about our ability to lead.
So Paul, thanks for that. And as I say, you're actually at the coalface doing it at several levels. I know you are. So, and in fact, if I could just maybe rephrase the question a little bit, we're back looking at language as well as at action. So, and Paul has put us back on the fact, do we need to be uncomfortable in order to get at the action and to do it? And in terms of intellectualizing on it, I know we have to then come out with a theory on it, but do we need to be uncomfortable to come to action and do the right thing? Or is it simply a matter of focusing on the right target? Okay, about a minute each, because we're going to try and rapidly get through.
Okay, I'll really quickly go, if that's okay, Lorenzo. If we try and make people uncomfortable, they'll move to people who make them feel comfortable. That we've seen that happen, and those people will tell them things that they want to hear, like Trump, in order that they feel comfortable. The last 20 years we've spent waiting for catastrophe, within the environmental movement in order to shift people. And apparently the boiling frog thing is a myth, but we can get pretty uncomfortable before we will change, actually. And this is where a lot of the conclusions are starting to say that actually, to Lorenzo's point, and to Buckminster Fuller's point, you create something desirable that people want so that the existing thing becomes obsolete. And I would say, not to oversimplify, behavior change is a very intellectual topic, actually, Paul, but and it's complex. But I would say we need all sorts on horses for courses. But in general, what we've done badly is presenting the positives of moving, regardless, like Lorenzo said, regardless of the pain you might suffer, regardless of whether or not these things are real.
Okay, Lorenzo, and if we could keep it to about a minute, so we'll move on to other things then.
Start timing it. I completely agree with Victoria. I think there's plenty of evidence that shows that actually emergency crisis do not necessarily lead to innovative outcomes. Usually you get hijacked by populists and by potentially those that are somehow pushing for an agenda which is more conservative than the current one. Look at smoking. I mean, we didn't get a lot of people out of smoking from telling them that it was dangerous, and from it's not that everyone had to have cancer to stop smoking. We simply made it obsolete. A lot of people don't think it's cool anymore, and the same applies to many other cultural shifts. Hence the decision that we had to make this relevant in schools. Do not underestimate the importance of behavioral shifts happening through education. People, especially the younger generations, but not only them, because they're also the kids of someone my age and the grandchildren of someone else, they tend to become initiators of new cultures. They change fashion, what is acceptable in society, and so on and so forth. And I think that is what we need to be able to do, to make it appealing and to make it desirable. That's going to be the most powerful trigger of action, I think.
I agree with all three of you to some extent, but I have to say I'm with Paul on the basis that I think if we're not uncomfortable initially, certainly that's the way most are, we get uncomfortable and then we sort of feel that we should be doing something about it. I do also think that we should be playing within the current system. So in the current system, certainly in the UK, and I suspect it's similar in Italy and in the US, is that we've got a lot of people who are out there trying to have their great careers, earn a lot of money and make themselves comfortable. And if we're looking at targets of 2050 net zero, then the commercial argument on getting there isn't there, because planning 25 or 30 years ago, it doesn't give you a good commercial argument. Whereas if you've got a target of 2030 net zero, not only is that scientifically sound, but also companies that are aiming for that, countries that are aiming for that, can make calculations on how to run their budgets, do the investment, get the focus, and then potentially see rewards from it afterwards, whether that's profit or GDP uplift or anything else. And that comes out of setting the right focus, I guess, because we're uncomfortable and it's scientifically the right thing to do. And then we move on to those targets. So, and I do think that we need to sort of move from the negative into that positive thing, playing within the current system. So maybe it fits into the cultural thing we were talking to before, is we're playing inside the current culture. So, okay, so now I'm going to literally, these are going to be 30-second ones, and I might just go from one to each without particularly both of you doing it, so we can get through questions from other people. So from Tash, faced with a lack of effective leadership, what are the best ways for communities to prepare for the crisis? So assuming we're lacking our leadership, I suspect at a national level, how should communities prepare for the crisis? Right, Lorenzo, oh, Victoria's taking it. All right, Lorenzo, you let off.
Sorry. Yeah, only because, being a good friend over the years of Rob Hopkins, the Transition Town movement, and David Fleming, who started the Green Party, but also wrote, my friend worked on his book pre and post his death, on basically surviving the future. It's all in there, really. It's community cohesion, and that's really where we need to start if we're looking at preparedness. Also the foundations of mitigation. We need to get to know each other intimately again and have each other's back, and so I'd say transition towns and the like.
Yeah, I think building cohesive communities is the answer to adaptation, to preparedness, is the answer to being at the forefront of mitigation practices as well. So it's not either or. Actually, you get everything, more birds with one stone. But do not get complacent. Do not simply believe that because you're safe or safer, that's enough. So I think what I like of transition is the fact that they look inward in terms of what they do themselves, but they also have an outward application. So they are active on the international scene. And I think that way you're going to be much safer, protected, at the same time exerting leadership outside.
Okay, right. Lorenzo, one for you. So just for you, 30-second answer from Rosalind. We need to influence politicians who are the only ones with the power to put the necessary measures into practice. True or false?
Rosalind, I think it's partly true, partly false. As I said earlier, we can all make a difference. Politicians are going to react to what we want. They're going to react to what is being talked about in society. They're going to react to the demands that are made. So let's not overestimate the power of politicians. Of course, we need to influence them, but let's not forget that there are many other avenues and many other areas where we can make a difference. Often I feel and fear that this whole thing of, oh, you know, I can't do anything because the politicians are not listening is becoming an excuse for inaction, and that is not acceptable.
Can I just put it to you on that, at the top, at the sort of macro level, we've probably got politics, finance, and business are the big levers to get us through to the goals we need of a 2030 target or to well-being for humanity. Wouldn't you say, Lorenzo, and I'm sticking with you on this one, that the only way to get finance and business moving forward at the right pace is for politicians to create the policy, give them the carrots and sticks to get them there?
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, we did plenty of research with visionary corporates, and they would tell you, look, I'm extremely willing to do what you're saying, but unless the rules of the game change, I'm simply going to lose my job, and they're going to hire a new CEO that does what you guys don't want, right? So if the rules of the game don't change, it's really hard for corporate leaders to change their own behavior, right? Because even when they want to, I mean, we have to understand how corporations work. Even when they want to, because there are schizophrenic entities, right? It's not one person leading it. It's if you have a CEO that doesn't play by the rules of the game, that person may simply face demotion and be replaced with someone that does, right? So you wouldn't achieve much. But we also have to be honest about it, that politicians wouldn't change the rules of the game if secretly the corporates were not lobbying for them not to change the rules of the game. Again, it seems to me that at times it's becoming a bit of a play. So corporates blaming politicians, blaming corporates. So for instance, we do need lobbying that is actively going in the right direction. I cannot accept corporate leaders giving a public speech about change and transformation and then lobbying politicians to do exactly the opposite, and the other way around. And probably one of the roles that we have as scientists and intellectuals is to highlight this contradiction, the fact that there are dynamics here at play that make it impossible to really shift significantly unless everyone plays ball.
I would just add to that, though, Lorenzo, that I mean, most of my work is with corporates, and whilst it's really tough, you know, this governance trap, everyone can blame everyone else. It's tough everywhere. The rules of the game are like this for all of us. What happens, I see, is when you're really clear about your purpose, you're really clear about your strategic contribution to long-term well-being, then you start to get creative. And I've seen, you know, corporates find ways around this and are starting to reach out of their comfort zone to their spheres of influence, find ways around it. It's easy to say, oh, what's in front of me is not obvious. We can all do that. But if we get creative, but where does the motivation for creativity come from? And to someone else's question in the chat, where do you get your energy from when things are tough? It's you know, focusing on that end goal, because that is purposeful and meaningful. You know, we can change lives here. Massively. We are the generation. We have a blank sheet. We're being asked to change it. This is the most, if we were to take all the horrors aside, this is the most amazing period to be a human.
Great. Okay, one interesting question from Will. His question is, how do we get the nice guys in power so that they can lead us into the right direction? Because we keep getting populist tough guys. But I'd actually add to that, do we need the nice guys in power, or do we need the populist tough guys to do the right thing? Why don't you start? 30 seconds, Victoria.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot on leadership theory. There's some great stuff on evolutionary leadership and why basically we look for the wrong thing in leaders because we're conditioned that way, because society has moved, you know, what we need in society has moved much faster than our ability to see beyond someone with a deep voice and a certain thing and, you know, male and all the rest. So I think, yes, of course, we need different leaders. But what we really need to do is start voting for the people that can actually make the change whilst not relying on them. And I think that's the key message here. Politics is part of the solution, but the point is we can't rely on politics. And there's this governance trap. If each of us did everything within the power that we could do, encouraged everyone else to, I think we'd get there, we'd crack it. We can't rely on that. We can't wait for the right hero leader to come and sort it out, is what I'm saying.
Okay, Lorenzo, so keeping him as short as we can now. Nice guy, tough guy at the top. How do we get the right one there?
I think we get the right guys by being consistent in everything we do as citizens and as professionals and so on and so forth. My sense is that often, like we are privately trying, privately on the right side, on the good side, but then when we act as, again, professionals, citizens, entrepreneurs, media people, we seldom do that. We're seldom consistent. Again, I have this issue with the media. I met so many journalists and they all said that they liked what I was doing. In private, they were really complimenting me and commending me. And then in public, their newspapers would trash me every day, right? And they would tell me, but that's how our business works. We need to make it trashy. We need to ridicule politicians because that sells more copies. No, that's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. So if you're doing this, you're part of the problem. If in private you think that Victoria is right and she's saying something interesting, you need to do that when you act as a professional, whether you are, as I said, a journalist, whether you are a TV commentator, whether you are a teacher, whether you are anything. Too often, we are private good citizens and public bad citizens. And we simply, because maybe we have accepted the game, and that is not possible. In politics especially, it becomes a disincentive to come out of your shell and try and get there into the public domain. If you know that the reaction, because of the way the business works, is going to be really, really aggressive.
And I think that actually that comes on to a question from Phoebe Barnard. And just to everybody who's listening, Phoebe Barnard is the lead author of the Scientists Warnings into Action paper and is actually here with us tonight. And Phoebe asks, what are the truly fatal minefields in uniting society? And I think maybe just, literally sort of 30 seconds each on this. Is there a minefield that we should be avoiding in trying to do all of this? And I just throw in, after Lorenzo's comments there on the media and the way they should be covering, should we really be expecting the media to cover the nice guys, or should the nice guys be acting like the nasty guys and getting the headlines in the media for the right reasons? Anyway, so minefields and using the media, using the system as it is to get the right press. Victoria, would you like to start on that?
Yeah, I'll do the minefields one then. I would say, one of the greatest places we've gone wrong, and I keep banging on about it because it's utterly critical, is that we focused on strategies, not on the end objective. We need to be clear about the end objective, long-term well-being for all. It's definition of sustainability, definition of the outcome of a good economy, economics 101, and yet we have ended up just kind of ignoring it, pretending it, not checking it, not governing that it's being done, and focusing on strategy. Once you focus on strategy, you get ideological. People get into the rhythm of, oh, this is the strategy that I'm used to doing, or my family does, or we've always done, and it's a strategy. It's a strategy to an end, which is shared. So if we can go beyond that, that's where the minefield lies. And once we get that clear, and you'll see in the publications and in the British Standard coming out, that kind of clarity about ends and means and method, and then I think we can avoid some of those minefields. Great. And by the way, media, I'm working on a course with CISL on sustainable marketing, media and creative, addressing precisely that problem, because I completely agree with you. In terms of your question, Ed, I think I'll leave that one to Lorenzo.
Okay, Lorenzo.
So the one about minefields, right?
Minefields,
the one about
minefields, and also the communication in the press. Should we be expecting the press to put out there the nice people to communicate, or should we act dirty like the press wants us to communicate the right message?
Correct. So I think it's got to do with what Victoria was saying in terms of the difference between the ultimate objective and the strategy, right? The two things are somehow connected if you want to be successful. So it's really hard. And I believe me, I try every day, and I get invited by TVs and so on and so forth because I try to be controversial. But there's a limit to what you can do when you're trying to fight this battle. This battle comes with values, moral connotations. You can hardly, reduce it to the level of current media debate when it's too trashy, when it's too low level, when it's too commercial. It's really hard, right? So you need to have, so they need to meet you halfway through. I think the media, you can certainly learn their language, but I think the media has to make an effort to come a bit towards this, because otherwise it's a bit like, my grandfather used to tell me, if you're trying to discuss something with a stupid person, he will first bring you to his level and then will beat you with the experience, right? So if you make this too trashy in order to entice the media, at the end of the day, you're not going to win this battle. They're just going to end up ridiculing who you are. At the end of the day, we're scientists. Our credibility is because we are people who know what they're doing. So we need to be protected a little bit in order not to simply fall into the trap of the commercial communication strategies of most of these outlets. So I think there is a connection between the fact that our ultimate purpose is of such high standards that impacts our strategies to get there. And it's not that any strategy works for that sort of message.
Okay, great. Another sort of interesting one on the basis, again, we're Scientists Warning Europe, and we're all, this is the group that we are bringing together here. Now, Ileana Adamson has talked about how do we break down the barriers of science snobbery? And I think I'd probably just interpret that as being that many people put scientists on a bit of a pedestal, and there will be, of course, a number of scientists who act like they are on a pedestal as well, and that doesn't seem to help driving the action forward. Scientists create a lot of papers. We talked about the 4 scientist warnings, which are all papers talking about action, but they're pretty big papers, and the average man in the street is not going to be reading them. So do we break down the science snobbery by coming for our short, punchy communication for these papers? Or is it by scientists getting out there and doing something in their local community and getting their hands dirty in a practical sense? Limiting answers to 30 seconds so we can get another one in. Victoria, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think we have to humanize it. So, scientists need to bring their humanity, again, like many other organizational systems. We've kind of stripped it, we've mechanized academia as if the scientific process is actually the thing that's going to lead to real answers. And of course, that's challenged on so many levels. But it dictates the fact that we're supposed to be distanced from science, and science in turn is distanced from society. So and that therefore, so we have to break it down, and we have to then be clear, what is the purpose of universities, what's the purpose of an academic, and once an academic can get that, then connecting with society and going beyond that distant snobbery is actually critical to knowing what to research and to be able to get the answers that are actually going to make an impact in the world, the basis of pragmatist philosophy, you might say. So I'd say that's it. You humanize it by humanizing the objectives, and therefore you in turn need to humanize the process.
And if I was being less intellectual, would I say simplify and get my hands dirty?
Correct. I like that. Simplify and make your hands dirty. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Lorenzo, 30 seconds.
No, that's my answer too. I think it's both, as you said. You try to simplify. As I said, we need to be smart and learn the language of today's communication. And that is critical. And it's also critical to get your hands dirty with whatever you can, whether it's national politics, local politics, running your community, showing examples. So do not refrain from getting involved. I think, engagement is critical. The scientist shouldn't just look at the end of the world, and look at it as if it was happening in the lab. We're part of this, and we need to be driving forces.
Okay, question now from Dr. Stewart here, but I'm going to slightly paraphrase it, change it around slightly in terms of the way it's looking. Once leaders get involved in doing climate action, often they come under a lot of pressure. It's difficult to keep going, and it doesn't matter what level you're at, whether it's at a national level or at a community level or in your local football club. And you can get bashed back, and it's difficult to keep forcing your way forward. Now, Stuart's asking, when the top 20 fossil fuel majors are expected to invest 1.5 trillion in new oil and gas by 2040, How do the rest of us maintain enthusiasm for the small scale local environmental projects? I'm not wanting a comment on the fossil fuel. It's more about the way do we keep going with our smaller and medium sized projects when we see some really big stuff that's damaging the world? Who would like to go first? Okay, Victoria.
I can go again, just to say, there'll always be something bigger and scarier than the thing we're working on. You know, we're only ever an individual. And even those people within those big oil majors, you know, they'll all be seeing themselves as like, well, I can't really change the direction. So it's an argument we can use at all levels. So ultimately, we can't let that we can't let that relativeness defeat us. We have to focus on what is it that we can do, remembering that no matter what happens, building that community cohesion, building your personal resilience is going to be so important for being able to have the leadership that we need. So I think putting it in, you know, those things will always be there. There will always be bigger, scarier things than the thing that we think that we're dealing with, even if you are Antonio Guterres.
Okay, Lorenzo.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I think it's quite discouraging at times, I have to confess. I mean, let's not pretend we're superheroes here. You know, how many times I cried, how many times I went back to my wife and said, what the heck am I doing? You know, I should just be spending time with you and the kids and forget about the world, you know, whatever. You know, if they can screw themselves up, I won't be part of that. At least I'm going to enjoy the last few years of my life. But what I realized is that I wasn't going to be happy with my family unless I tried. So simply letting go and living your life as if you were separate wasn't making me the kind of father, husband, and person I wanted to be, even with my children. And so somehow I realized that for me to be a good dad, I needed to be involved. I needed to be able to go back home every night and say, look, Dad tried again, you know, and that made us a stronger family, a better family. So I think, and I wonder whether these guys from the fossil fuel industry or many other industries for that matter, it's not just fossil fuels, are feeling the same kind of, you know, warmth in their hearts when they go back home at night. And I think if we realize that, I think engagement becomes inevitable, even if it's not going to be successful, but it's going to be inevitable. And maybe it's going to be successful. Who knows, you know, so we need to believe in it.
Yeah, Lorenzo, I just want to emphasize what you said there, because I think it's, you know, so important, is that every time I feel like giving up, I then go in this really, and it becomes ever quicker, the loop that goes, well, what am I going to do? I mean, and that's, you know, and you get to the point of thinking, actually, the only thing is to act. And as Greta really beautifully said, you know, hope is in action. And if I'm not doing it, where's my hope? And then you start to say, you know what, actually, and enjoy the process. And I know that sounds hugely bizarre, but I'm living my best life. You know, I really am, despite the fact of the horrors of, and I think it's because I've accepted quite a long time ago, through waves of understanding, I've accepted. So rather than fighting against it, I accept what we're dealing with. I accept that it might all go tomorrow, that horrors might, but it's like, you know what? Even when I was 13, I had the best life. And of course, that's personal to everybody. But I think if we're not enjoying the process, then where do you get your energy from? To the answer to someone's chat that put in the chat.
I think if I could add a little bit to that from on a personal basis as well, is acting at a number of different levels. So I mean, I'm, you know, both as an individual in various organizations and my personal bit in my life, then as a parish councillor, which is of course at a lower level of community involvement, unitary councillor, and then in Scientists Warning Europe, trying to do things on a national and international level. Personally, I find what's happening on a national and international level draining. I find it tough moving forward on that, and I have to keep driving myself forward because it's the right thing to do. But then when I come back to the local level and I go into the parish council or community project, I feel like it's a salve for my soul. It keeps me going, it energizes me. I've got my hands dirty with local people and we're really doing things. And David Ramsden, interestingly, reminds us in the chat about it's not just climate, it's of course biodiversity and nature as well. And one small example for me is last year in my little, you know, in our parish council, we launched a project getting everybody to put 1 meter square of wildflower seeds into their front garden. It was so successful, we won a local award and that sort of thing. There's now something like 10 or 15 parish and town councils copying it. It's gone from 3,000 doors to something like 40,000 doors and more inquiring about next year, and it's growing and growing. And that small little nugget that you can see growing is very much an encouragement to keep working on other things. So we're coming now. Sorry, go ahead, Victoria.
I was just going to say, because it's something you said earlier as well, and it's something that's kept me going and might be useful to others, is leadership's also about faith, and acting in this it's a massive dose of faith, not only because you're leading into the unknown, that means it's unknown for you as well, you just think it's the right thing to do, but all you can ever do is plant seeds and know that one day they'll be watered. So I try and say, well, if I'm acting with the right intention at that moment in time, the rest is in the wind. And it could be, despite all the things that I might have tried to do, the person I sit next to on the bus that I have a conversation with that goes and have the much bigger impact than I ever have. And I might never know that. And that's okay.
Brilliant. Okay, we're coming to the end. And so we'll have a slightly sort of simple, cuddly question for the end, but for both of you just to talk about. So if you do happen to have a favorite climate leader, and it can be yourselves as well, if you like, then it'd be nice to hear about that now. If you don't, or if you would like to anyway add it, is what about the trait of a climate leader at whatever level, maybe with a bit of an illustration, the trait, the singular trait you think every climate leader should have? And we're going to finish on this afterwards. So who would like to give first on their favorite climate leader and then a trait of climate leadership that inspires them the most?
Maybe I'll just go quickly, Lorenzo, and then you can finish off. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. I'm going to really embarrass you now, Ed. You are one of my climate leaders.
You have embarrassed me. Okay, Red.
No, but I'm being serious, because when I talk about what you've done, to me, you embody that. You kind of had been living a life that wasn't focused on this. You woke up. You acknowledged that you'd woken up, that you'd seen, beyond this veil that we all sort of, many people live with, and then you did stuff, and you did tough stuff. You did stuff that most people think about but don't do. You knocked on doors. You tried to convince people. You started local community things, and that is the essence of it. So I want to thank you on behalf of everyone for the fact that you've done that and that you continue to lead on it, because you really are exemplifying exactly what we're talking about here.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Humbling to hear it. But anyway, thank you. So, Lorenzo.
Well, I'd like to emphasize that. I think, people like you, Ed, are extremely crucial and do a great job. And I think, so I'm not going to mention any other name except yours. But when you speak about the traits, I think that the traits that a climate leader must have is the ability to connect things. And so to connect the ability of being consistent, to being active locally as well as proactive globally, right? So there are too many climate leaders who are very good at speaking but not at doing. Other climate leaders who are good globally, but if you ask them whether they've got ever any idea as to how to bring their communities forth in terms of climate resilience and adaptation and mitigation and so on and so forth, they know nothing. I've seen so many green leaders who had never even touched photovoltaic panels, didn't know what geothermal energy is, knew everything by the script, but zero by the practice. And I think the good trait of a climate leader is the ability of connecting these different aspects: local, global, practice, and theory, and communication with deeds, because then that makes everything more credible. When you do that, when you can do that, you become credible. You're not simply reciting a part, but you are actually showing the evidence. And that's what people want. People want to know that this transition is possible, it's desirable, it can happen, it's not particularly complicated, it's not going to result in many sacrifices, and actually what you get out of it is more than what you give it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Connection. I mean, how can you lead anybody if you can't connect with them? So, and when you look at those leaders who have the most effect, and we did talk about populism, which isn't particularly a pretty word, let's say, but it's about creating a connection. But when you do it at a personal level and a community level, it really inspires deep change in people. And that change can last for a very, very long time. So in fact, it's funny because having done my little plug on young people entering parish councils, I probably should mention that when I was at COP26, actually, I was at a particular event, and a young man came up to me who'd been on a Scientists Warning Europe event when I'd made a plug for this about 18 months ago, and told me, because of me, he was joining his parish council. So there he was, going in to start climate activism in his parish council. So that was great. Okay, I'd like to thank absolutely everybody for coming, particularly Victoria and Lorenzo our fantastic speakers. What a great chat and conversation. It'd be wonderful one day to do it in person and have other people there with us interacting. So that was absolutely fantastic, really wonderful. Thank you. And to everybody, please can you remember to come into the Scientists Warning website if you're a graduate scientist in any science, so natural sciences, any social sciences, please come in, sign the paper and have a read of it. You'll help us to sort of achieve our aims on our way towards COP27. Please, if you'd like to get involved, you don't have to sit back after this and go, great, these guys gave me lots of ideas and theory about climate leadership. Now, what do I do? Send an email to Scientists Warning Europe. We would love some help with something, I can assure you. So let us know, and we will certainly like to have your help in some way. There were a lot of friends and colleagues who turned up. We had quite a smattering of scientists and councillors and various others on here as well. So thanks very much to all of you who are all change makers for coming and for the changes you're initiating in your communities as well. So thanks a lot, everybody, and good night.